Due to America's unforgivable cowardice to enact even the most basic legislation against our laissez-faire treatment of guns, weekly shootings result in countless deaths. Even the loss of children is not enough to melt the dead, unfeeling hearts of Republicans and Joe Eat Shit Manchin. I mention this because this episode uses the scenario of a Western gunfight as a backdrop, including several gunshot sound effects. This content may be sensitive to some listeners, and it's fine to skip this episode. I'll make sure to cover the same material in some fashion in the next episode, The Ugly Conditions, Sans Guns. Sorry in advance, and may those in more forward-thinking societies pity us for our inaction.
Hello, I'm Andrew. I don't have anything to plug, but I just wanted to give a virtual hug to all the game masters who want to run Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but can't for whatever reason. I see you. You are valid, and you are loved. Rise of the Rulelords uses trademarks and/or copyrights owned by Paizo Incorporated used under Paizo's community use policy. We are expressly prohibited from charging you to use or access this content. Rise of the Rulelords is not published, endorsed, or specifically approved by Paizo. For more information about Paizo Inc. and Paizo products, visit paizo.com. And remember, don't let the rules rule you.
Coming at you hot, they're the bad conditions on Rise of the Rulelords. That the best you can do? Well, ain't you a sight for sore eyes? It's me again, Snake Eyes, the gambling gunslinger of Jeez. Well, you picked a heck of a time to come around Alkenstar. You might have noticed that we're in a bit of a barrel here in which we are the fish. Well, them's out there, the bad condition gang. The meanest pack of hooligans and hustlers that you're ever gonna meet. But don't be too afeared, for as bad as these conditions are, they're fairly common. Both as a player and GM, you're likely to come across them more than once in an encounter. They'll keep you pinned down for a spell, but they go down pretty easy and ain't much of a shot. You just gotta know how to take care of them. Now, before I go and take out the rest of these pitiful prairie dogs, it's important to go over a couple of outstanding matters. Looking at the condition themselves, you'll see that a lot of them don't have some kind of duration or healing effect to get rid of them. That's because the spell or creature effect that went and applied the condition should have some kind of description saying under what circumstances you can get rid of it. If and it don't, there's a couple of different things that you can do. First off, you might double check to see if there's some kind of spell what might be able to get rid of the condition, such as the Restore Senses level 2 necromancy spell. This can counteract a single effect imposed by the blinded or deafened conditions on a target, restoring its vision or hearing. Now, it only counteracts deafened or blinded caused by magic, but it's one possible solution. The GM might also be kind enough to make a ruling of some kind. Could be that you say that the deafened condition only lasts for a minute, or for one round. Point is, GMs, provide some kind of out in case you're missing one. 99 times out of 100, I'd say that you're going to be fine reading the description of the spell or effect. But if and one ain't there, make a ruling. Ain't no sense standing around slack-jawed while there's fighting to be had. Speaking of, now I don't know what bee got in their pretty floral bonnets to get them so riled up. Could be they woke up realizing they were more ugly than usual. Could be that I cleaned them out in liar dice. Well, the point is we'll never know. Right now, all of them have the hostile condition. It's when a creature actively wants to harm a character. Like so many of the other attitude-based conditions, it can only be imposed on a PC with some kind of supernatural effect like a spell. However, a hostile creature doesn't necessarily attack, it just won't accept requests from the character. Now, it's important to note that just because a character is hostile doesn't mean that it's going to fight to the death. A creature with some semblance of intelligence will probably realize it's better to retreat if its life seems to be in danger. If it has the ability to communicate, it might even surrender. I reckon it'd also be a good piece of advice for GMs to provide some manner for the players to end an encounter with a hostile creature without having to resort to combat. Could be a chase, could be bribery, could even be blackmail. Point is, nowhere in the hostile condition does it also say the creature is suicidal. You can absolutely parlay with a hostile creature, it's just going to be a bit harder than usual. That said, seems these sons of guns do have a death wish a-coming, so why don't you ski-daddle behind the saloon and let me and old Bessie here take out the trash. You'll never take me alive!
Oh, hey there. It's your cheap and easy Rulelord Pete. Oh yeah, I'm just gonna wait behind the counter here and enjoy the sarsaparilla while Snake Eyes takes care of all of those guys out there. But while we're both pinned down here, we might as well go over each of the conditions while he takes them out.
Try walking after that, flat-footed Freddy.
Ah yes, the flat-footed condition is one of the most common that you're probably ever going to encounter in your time playing Pathfinder 2nd Edition. When a creature is flat-footed, they take a -2 penalty to their AC. This condition is caused whenever a creature is distracted or unable to focus their full attention on defense. One of the most common ways that a creature becomes flat-footed are when two allied creatures are on opposite sides of an enemy creature. This works both for monsters or bad guy NPCs against players, as well as players versus monsters or bad guy NPCs. Now, one thing for GMs to keep in mind is that flanking is very much a tactical decision. It's definitely something organized creatures or creatures with higher reasoning ability would be able to think to do, but it's less common for creatures like animals or some beasts to think to do. Heck, there are probably even some thugs who aren't smart enough to think to do that. While flanking is one of the most common, it's definitely not the only way. Some effects give you the flat-footed condition only to certain creatures or against certain attacks. Others, especially conditions, can make you universally flat-footed against everything. So for example, if you use feint successfully, your foe will be fooled, but only against your next melee attack against them. There are other actions like climb, where you will be automatically flat-footed while climbing unless you have a climb speed. If a rule doesn't specify that the condition applies only to certain circumstances, it applies to all of them. For example, many effects simply say the target is flat-footed. So back to our flanking example, the flanked creature is only flat-footed to the two opposed allied creatures. However, if a third creature comes up and is not on the opposite side of one of its allies, it will not get the benefit of flanking, even though the hostile creature is surrounded on all sides. Or for another example, if you use the create a diversion action and successfully stealth or hide against another creature and then strike at them, the creature will be flat-footed to your attack, but not to anyone else's. And as another example, if you critically fail your disarm check against another creature, you will lose balance and become flat-footed until the start of your next turn. That means that you will be flat-footed to every enemy creature that attacks you for a whole round. Flat-footed is such a bad condition to be in because a -2 to your AC can have huge implications. Not only are you generally more likely to get hit, you're also 20% more likely to be critically hit. This only gets more dangerous at higher levels when we start to introduce critical specialization effects. And many monsters have bonuses that automatically apply on a critical hit. Point is that no matter what level you're playing at, a -2 is nothing to scoff at. In fact, one of the only things that's worse than being flat-footed is...
Drop dead, Patty McProne!
...is being prone. When you're prone, you are lying on the ground. Not only are you flat-footed, but you also take a -2 circumstance penalty to attack rolls. The only way to get out of being prone is to stand, or to be stood up. The only move actions you can take while being prone are to crawl and to stand, both of which are move actions and thus can provoke attacks of opportunity. One of the only benefits to being prone is that it lets you also take cover. You know how in movies they always say, "Get down!" Well, while prone, you can use the take cover action to hunker down and gain greater cover against ranged attacks, even if you don't have an object to get behind. This will give you a +4 circumstance bonus to AC against ranged attacks, but you'll still be flat-footed. If you read between the lines a little bit though, that means that you're only going to get a +2 to your AC against ranged attacks while prone. The -2 penalty that you're taking while flat-footed is a circumstance penalty, while the +4 that you're getting for being prone while taking cover is a +4 circumstance bonus. So the +4 and the -2 cancel out a little bit, equaling to a +2. You see, Gary Gygax tricked us all into thinking that math is fun.
Looks like you put on a little weight, Encumbered Eddie.
Encumbered is when you're carrying more weight than you can manage. If you carry an amount of bulk more than 5 plus your strength modifier, then you become encumbered. While you're encumbered, not only will you take a 10-foot penalty to all your speeds, you'll also become Clumsy 1. Now we're going to talk more about Clumsy in the Ugly episode. But for right now, know that that means that you're going to take a -1 to your AC for as long as you're encumbered. The good news though is that encumbered never gets worse. Being encumbered cannot reduce your speed below 5 feet. So even if you're a dwarf in full plate armor, with stage 2 bog rot, and you're encumbered, your speed will still not fall below 5 feet. And while the bulk rules say that you cannot exceed 10 plus your strength modifier with the amount of bulk that you carry, if you're carrying 9.9 bulk plus your strength modifier, you won't become encumbered 2 or encumbered 3, it's just encumbered. The good news is that encumbered is also one of the easiest conditions to get rid of. All you have to do is get rid of some of that stuff that you're carrying, like those 5 pairs of banded iron armor, or those 50 bent Dwemer scrap pieces. You could probably even sell 20, maybe even 30 of those dragon bones that you've been carrying around. Or you could just conscript someone to be sworn to carry all your burdens. Whatever the method, as long as you can get it down so that you're no longer carrying more than your bulk capacity, you can get rid of encumbered.
Looking a little tired, Freddy Fatigued.
Now, if you're carrying pounds and pounds of stuff on your back, you're probably going to get fatigued. Luckily, being encumbered does not cause you to get the fatigued condition. Rather, the most common way to become fatigued is if you go 16 hours without resting. If you become fatigued, you take a -1 status penalty to AC and saving throws, and you also can't use exploration activities while traveling. To get rid of fatigue, you have to have at least 6 continuous hours of sleep. Continuous is the operative word because it's typically 8 hours before you can regain your hit points, spell slots, regain focus points, and reinvest in worn items. Why continuous is in there is because in some cases you might need to set up watches. If the players need to rest while they're in a hostile environment, they can put up watches so that they can possibly prevent themselves from falling into a surprise attack. As the size of the party decreases, the amount of time that the whole party needs to rest increases. So if you have a party of 2, they'll have to spend 16 hours resting so that each player can have a watch of 8 hours each. While a party of 6 only has to spend 9.5 hours to rest, because divided equally, it only takes 1.5 hours for each player to do their watch. Table 10-3 lists out all of the watch times as well as the total rest time. In each case, all characters will be able to receive 8 hours of rest, but at least 6 hours of continuous rest. So the player that has to wake up in the middle of the night doesn't have to worry about still being fatigued the next morning. It'll equal out either way. One important caveat though with both resting and watches is that sleeping in armor results in a poor rest that does leave you fatigued. So that's an important consideration the party is going to have to think about when they're making their nightly preparations. Is it safe enough to rest? But also, is it safe enough to rest without armor? They can, of course, still get the full 8 hours of sleep, recover their hit points, and all of that jazz, but they will wake up fatigued if they spent that whole time donned in armor.
Better grab on to something, Jerry. Shot the roof right out from under him.
One of the most common conditions a player will ever have is grabbed. When you're grabbed, you're held in place by another creature, giving you the flat-footed and immobilized conditions. Grab, in my opinion, has almost replaced Attack of Opportunity as being the big thing to look out for. The grab action is specific to monsters. If they hit you with a certain kind of strike, they might have a plus grab. Now, they do still have to spend an action in order to grab you, unless they have improved grab. But if they have the action economy to spend to grab you, then you're grabbed. Now, flat-footed and immobilized are bad conditions to have, but they're not the end of the world, especially for martial fighters. The flat-footed condition sucks. It does make you easier to hit, but most martials can probably take the damage. Many martials also stay in one place in order to hit things, so being immobilized is fine. The only other negative effect of being grabbed is that if you attempt to manipulate an action while grabbed, you must succeed at a DC 5 flat check or it's lost, and you roll the check after spending the action but before any effects are applied. Now again, that's pretty bad, but attack is not a manipulate action. In fact, there's quite a lot of things that you can do without having it be a manipulate action. Some of the things you won't be able to do are administer first aid, treat disease, treat poison, treat wounds, grab an edge, or interact. And that's just to name a few. Rather, the real people who are going to hurt from being grabbed are spellcasters. Any spell that has the material, somatic, or focus traits are also manipulate actions. Only spells that are 100% verbal are able to be cast while being grabbed. If a creature grabbed you using the grab action, they're going to have you grabbed until the end of the monster's next turn, and they can do a lot of damage in that time. Grab serves as the basis for many special attacks that monsters have, such as Constrict or Swallowed Whole. Direwolves can shake creatures in their jaws, dealing extra damage, while animated trebuchets can launch grabbed creatures up to 120 feet away. But don't worry, players, remember you have the grapple action on your side. As long as you have a hand free and your target isn't more than one size larger than you, you can attempt an athletics check against their fortitude DC. If you succeed, you'll get to grab them too. This will impose all the same penalties on the monster that they would do to you if they grabbed you. Creatures with hands can also use grapple, so they can come at you from two different fronts. Grab is most common from creatures that are more animal-like, whereas grapple can come from creatures that are more like bipedal or sentient. Whether you're grabbed or grappled, the only way to stop having the grabbed condition is either to wait until the grab condition ends, which again is at the end of the next turn for the monster, or to escape. Typically, because you're going up against a creature that's holding you, you'll go against their athletics DC using either an unarmed attack modifier, your acrobatics, or an athletics check. Now remember, each attempt to escape has the attack action, meaning that you'll take a multiple attack penalty each time that you try. But for some people, that expenditure can be worth it. Of all the bad traits that we're going to go over today, this one might be the ugliest.
Sammy, I ought to shoot you just 'cause you're stink. That's one of the most sickening stenches I ever smelled.
There are many different ways to become sickened, whether it's hazards like mold, spells, curses, armor, monstrous effects, and of course, disease. When you're sickened, you feel ill, just like in real life. But unlike real life, sicken always includes a value, such as sickened 1 through 4. You take a status penalty equal to this value to all your checks and DCs. Did I say all? Because I meant
All of them.
your attacks, your skill checks, your perception, your initiative, your class DC, your spell DC, your spell attacks, all of them take a penalty. You also can't willingly ingest anything, including elixirs and potions while sickened. Sicken, like most conditions, will have some kind of criteria for when sicken goes down. The effect that caused the condition might say that you have it for a minute. It could say that it goes down once each round. If it doesn't, you will remain sickened until you recover yourself. How can you recover? Well, by retching. Retching is not an explicitly designated action, but it is within the sicken condition. If you spend an action retching to attempt to recover, it lets you attempt an immediate fortitude save against the DC of the effect that made you sickened. On a success, reduce the sicken value by 1, or 2 on a critical success. Because Retch isn't a set action, there aren't any traits to go by. So that means it's not an attack.
Except for maybe an attack on the senses, am I right?
And there is no strict limitation, meaning that you could just spend every single one of your actions retching. Inside combat, this can be a pretty big decision to make. Do you stay sickened or do you retch? Outside combat, it's a little silly to keep on making people make continuous fortitude saves when they'll just make another retch on a failed save. But you're the GM, you make the call. It does need to be stated though that the sickened condition is different from being diseased. Afflictions aren't conditions themselves, but they can cause conditions, including the sickened condition. This means that if you have a disease, retching is not necessarily going to save you. Afflictions have stages, in which case you'll be able to attempt a new save before the next stage begins. Players can use actions like treat disease or treat poisons to grant themselves bonuses to those saving throws, but you're not just going to be able to retch infinitely to get rid of a curse. If you get a condition from an affliction, it might give you that condition longer than the affliction lasts for. The condition could also be shorter than the affliction. In either case, recovering from either the affliction or condition are treated separately. You can heal yourself from the affliction but still have the underlying condition that it imposed on you. You may also be able to solve one of the conditions but still have the underlying affliction. Let's say you have the bubonic plague, which interestingly nowadays is very easy to cure. At stage 3, you would become enfeebled 3, fatigued, and take 1d6 persistent bleed damage every 1d20 minutes for a whole day. Now for the persistent bleed damage, you can still roll a 15 flat check to see if you can recover from it. If you do, the bleed damage will end. The bubonic plague, however, will not. That will require a different save. I know, I strayed a little bit away from the sickened condition itself, but I just wanted to add that little bit of clarification. Think of sickened more like nauseous, whereas diseased is more like being truly sick.
Looking a little confused there, Connie. Make sure not to hurt yourself.
If you've ever played Pokemon, you know that the worst creature in the entire game isn't the one that does the most damage. It's not even the ones that come up the most and are the least useful to catch. Even Magikarp is better than this Pokemon, and that's Zubat, scourge of young trainers everywhere. That's because it had its supersonic ability that caused your Pokemon to become confused and hurt itself in confusion. Unlike every other status penalty, this was the one that didn't have any kind of cure. Not for a few generations, at least. Being confused in Pathfinder is no less annoying, or dangerous. When you have the confused conditions, you don't have your wits about you and attack wildly. Not only are you flat-footed, but you don't treat anyone as your ally. You also can't delay, ready, or use reactions. The worst part about this condition for players, though, is that you're largely going to have to cede control of your character to your GM. Confused creatures have to use all their actions to strike or cast defensive cantrips. But if you think just being far away from everybody else will save you, no it won't. Your GM can also have you use other actions to facilitate the attack, such as drawing a weapon, moving so that a target is within reach, and so forth. Is it just the closest targets that are attacked? You wish. Instead, while you're confused, targets are determined randomly. Now, there is no set criteria for how that randomness is achieved. Your GM could roll a d6 and say on evens, attack the nearest ally, on odds, attack the nearest enemy. You could assign all viable attackable creatures a percentage point and roll percentage dice. You could flip a coin and see who it lands closest to on the map. However you choose to do it, allies are just as viable targets as enemies. But if you don't have any other viable targets, you target yourself, meaning you hurt yourself in confusion. You do automatically hit yourself, but you will not score a critical hit, ever. Finally, if it's impossible for you to attack or cast spells, such as by being restrained, you babble incoherently, wasting all of your actions. Friends of the confused creature, worry not though. You can still treat confused creatures as your allies. However, you can also defend yourself, and that might even be the best course of action. Each time a confused creature takes damage from a spell or attack, they can attempt a DC 11 flat check to recover from their confusion and end the condition. So in this case, if you spare the rod, you may spoil the barbarian. Even a simple, unarmed attack by the lowliest of spellcasters has the chance to break someone out of their confusion.
Hey, see that barrel of oil over there? Oh, that's gonna dazzle some of them.
Dazzled is a pretty simple explanation. Your eyes are overstimulated. If vision is your only precise sense, all creatures and objects are concealed from you. If you've ever played one of those games that has a flash grenade, it's basically that. And remember, concealed doesn't mean that you can't hit other things, it just means that you need to make a DC 5 flat check when targeting a creature. The blinded condition will also override dazzled if that gets added onto you.
Yee-hoo! Explosion got one of them on fire. They can't keep their eyes off the little bugger.
The fascinate condition is one that could go either way for when you want it to be applied to you. When you're fascinated, you're compelled to focus your attention on something, distracting you from whatever else is going on around you. You'll take a -2 penalty to perception and skill checks, and you can't use actions with the concentrate trait unless they or their intended consequences are related to the subject of your fascination, as determined by your GM. All in all, it may not be the worst condition to have applied to you as a player. After all, if you're fascinated in combat, you're probably fascinated to the creature that you're trying to kill, a creature you were already concentrating on, and so now you're just extra concentrated on them. But as players, this can be a really interesting tactic to apply to enemies. If you're able to focus the source of fascination, you might be able to move enemies away from squishier players. In social situations, you might be able to use it to give everyone else a -2 to their perception and skill checks while people do things in the background. Conversely, if you're a player, you might need to do something else, but you're just so fascinated on some other object that you can't go help out the rest of your team. Or if a monster is fascinated on you, well then the monster is fascinated on you, directing all of its attacks on you. Exactly what action someone can take with the concentrate trait will depend on your GM, but they do have to be focused on the subject. If you are fascinated, you might be able to seek or recall knowledge about a subject. But if you tried seeking or recalling knowledge about anything else outside of that subject, you wouldn't be able to do it. Because so many spells have the concentrate trait, this can be a particularly brutal condition for spellcasters. It'll also prevent you from doing actions like coerce, demoralize, impersonate, lie, or make an impression. So, this is just as effective of a condition outside of combat as it is within combat. However, like confusion, this condition will end if a creature uses hostile action against the fascinated creature or any of its allies. So in combat especially, you're very unlikely to just remain constantly mesmerized by whatever you're fascinated by.
I think this fight's just about over. I can see the fear in their eyes.
The frightened condition causes you to be gripped by fear, and you struggle to control your nerves. Frightened always includes a value, from Frightened 1 through Frightened 4. Just like Sickened, you'll take a status penalty equal to this value to all your checks and DCs. However, unlike Sickened, unless otherwise specified, your Frightened value will decrease by 1 at the end of each of your turns. The cool thing about Frightened, especially as a player, is that this is one of the easiest and most powerful conditions to inflict on an enemy. By using the demoralize action, you can attempt an intimidation check against a target's will DC. On a success, it becomes Frightened 1, and on a critical success, it becomes Frightened 2. While it will be temporarily immune to all of your attempts to demoralize it for the next 10 minutes, this is a very easy way to get an early edge in a fight. One simple action that virtually any player character can do can make an enemy easier to hit and hit less hard. For anyone who's wondered what to do with that third action, this is a great choice.
I think this little scrap's just about done. Looks like they're gathering their wounded. What little I left for them.
As scary as the death and dying rules in Pathfinder 2nd Edition are, wounded is a pretty good condition to have, because it means you're not dead yet. However, you were dying, and then you lost that condition. Maybe someone did a heal spell on you. Maybe someone jammed a potion of healing down your throat. Either way, you are no longer dying. If this is your first time going down, and you didn't already have the wounded condition, you'll become Wounded 1. The wounded condition essentially serves as a countdown for how many times you've gone down. If you died once and then got back up, then you're Wounded 1. If you died twice, then got back up, you're Wounded 2. It doesn't matter what stage of dying you reached. It matters how many times you got back up. However, it's a different case for the reverse. If you're already wounded, if you go down again, you will increase your dying condition by your wounded value. So let's say that you were Wounded 1, then went down again, all the way down to dying 3. But then someone did battle medicine on you, which does not remove the wounded condition, and you got back up to Wounded 2. If you start to die again, you will start at dying 2. So, if you already have the wounded condition when you lose the dying condition, your wounded condition increases by 1. But, if you gain the dying condition while wounded, you increase your dying condition by your wounded value. You can go all the way up to Wounded 4. The important thing is that you don't get down to dying 4. As long as you're still standing by the time combat ends, you're good. However, you will maintain the wounded conditions until someone successfully restores hit points, either by restoring hit points to you with Treat Wounds skill action, or restored to full hit points and rest for 10 minutes. One thing to keep in mind is that if you spend a hero point to avoid death, you will not gain the wounded condition. You also won't increase the wounded condition if you already had it by using a hero point. However, while the hero point will save you from dying, it won't increase or decrease any existing wounded conditions that you currently have. It's also worth noting that you'll gain the wounded condition at 0 hit points. Dying only occurs once you have gone beyond 0 hit points. If you're stabilized either by the spell or with Administer First Aid and brought back up to 0 hit points, that is when you will start to have the wounded condition rather than the dying condition. You'll still be unconscious until you have at least 1 hit point, which is a very important piece of errata to keep an eye out for, but you're still technically alive, so that's good. So, as a final reminder, hostile, an NPC with this condition wants to harm you. Flat-footed, you're unable to defend yourself to your full capacity. Prone, you're lying on the ground and easier to attack. Encumbered, you're carrying more weight than you can manage. Fatigued, your defenses are lowered and you can't use exploration activities while traveling. Grappled, a creature, object, or magic holds you in place. Sickened, you're sick to your stomach. Confused, you attack indiscriminately. Dazzled, everything is concealed to you. Fascinated, you are compelled to focus your attention on something. Frightened, fear makes you less capable of attacking and defending. Wounded, you've been brought back from the brink of death, but haven't fully recovered.
Well, you lily livers can come out of your shells now. Show's over and any of the condition gang is either dead or fleeing. But like a bad penny, they'll be back, and with reinforcements too. And I can't be having to look over my shoulder after you two.
I think that's sound advice. But before you go, remember, like Andrew, you can submit a community use policy reading to play at the beginning of each episode. All you have to do is record yourself reading Paizo's community use policy agreement. Simply add Rise of the Rulelords to it and include a little ditty about yourself before and after. Say hi to your gaming group, or even your family if they listen to this. You may also want to mark a special occasion. Who knows? But I can't play them unless I get them. And there's 2 ways you can do that. Either go to rulelord2e.com, which will go to my anchor page, and you can submit one by going to message me. Or you can record yourself and email rulelord2e@gmail.com. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at rulelord2e, where I can answer your questions, or you can follow me for all the weird and random stuff that I post. And for more awesome Pathfinder 2nd Edition content, make sure to go to the R Pathfinder 2e subreddit. I'm one of the mods there, and we worked really hard to make it an open environment for new people, as well as an awesome place for people to post new and extraordinary content that makes your game even better.
Enough of your belly yammering. I can already see the dust on the horizon. They're coming back. So, kid, what'd you think? Can you take these conditions on in a firefight, or are you gonna scamper away with your tail between your legs at the first sign of trouble? Make sure to let us know at Rulelord2e on Twitter. And if I see you go on Apple Podcasts or Spotify without leaving a review or rating, there's gonna be more trouble afoot for you. But until that time, Tenderfoot, don't let the rules rule you.